So here we are. I'm now at my folks' house for the holidays and everything, and I want to still keep the channel going while I am enjoying my holidays. So, working even though I got time off. That's pretty much what I'm doing here. If the sun is setting over here wasn't any indication, we're going to talk about something very sad today. So, I've always wanted to be a philosophy professor for a very long time, and unfortunately, that didn't pan out, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So, throughout my life, people have been saying, even though I've been usually seen as the quiet guy, when I do talk, I'm usually have been described as being very well spoken, got a good head on my shoulders, all that gambit, right? I mean, it's kind of why this channel exists. People have been saying, "Hey, you should start something. You should start talking and get some of your ideas out there." And that's kind of what influenced me to start off this channel. And like I've been saying, like I've been wanting to use my voice using whatever intellect I have for greater purposes and more as a teaching tool more than anything else because I love teaching and I've done that before. But let's step back a little bit and sort of talk about my experience as a philosophy major, my time in college, and all of that. So before college even kicked off, in I want to say high school, maybe even middle school, my dad suggested to me, "You might really enjoy philosophy." I didn't know what philosophy was because grade school they don't teach you much about philosophy at all. But being someone who didn't grow up with faith necessarily, philosophy was kind of the next best thing. If you don't have certain stories or values locked in, philosophy is a good way for you to look at certain values and ideas kind of behind the scenes. Like as I've sort of said before, you can look at all these perspectives, all these religions, whatever have you, and choose what's important for yourself. And that's kind of the way that I've been living since middle school, high school. So I struggled a lot through high school. That's a story for another time, as I've said. And throughout that entire time, I've been fiddling with philosophy kind of just on my own. Like I knew nothing about the philosophers. I knew nothing about like actual philosophical principles, but I was still like writing my own ideas. And granted, they were very crude, and I wouldn't endorse a lot of the ideas I was writing then. They were still the early pioneering seeds of what would come afterwards. Then I got to college, and I was still curious enough that I selected philosophy as my major. And it was great. And there was a community of other people who were, of course, teaching philosophy, other people who were studying philosophy, and it was wonderful. Basically, to give you an idea of my track record, I first studied the Greeks, which is pretty much the initial stepping stone for most people. It's a very good starting point, I think, for a lot of folks. I mean, I think the most important thing you learn from philosophy when you're beginning is Socrates saying, "I know that I know not." That is the root of any philosopher, I think, no matter what region you're studying, whether you're writing philosophy yourself, as I do on occasion. But you gotta know that you don't know. That's an important part of the entire thing. That's what allows you to be open to all those perspectives. Then you can learn. That's the whole purpose of it. Then after that, I studied the Chinese philosophers like Confucius, Lao Tzu, and all of them. And I admittedly, ironically enough, even though I'm half Chinese myself, I didn't find myself attaching to the Chinese philosophers as much as I did to the Greeks, which was a little weird. I feel like the Chinese philosophers, they're a little bit too ambiguous, a little too airy in what they were saying, and that they'd give you, like, a saying, then you gotta just be left on your own, to your own devices, and figure out what it means. But the Greeks were a little bit better at kind of fleshing it out, explaining it, having, like, dialogues, like, you hear about Socratic seminars and stuff like that, and they base it more around discussion, talking to each other, fleshing out those ideas as a unit. But in Chinese philosophy, it's more so they give you a little nugget like, the refrigerator is no greater than the camel. And then you're like, huh? What? Ah? And then you're like, as a beginner, I don't think it's a good place to start off. You just got to figure it out on your own. And granted, that's kind of the point of Chinese philosophy, that you're not always going to get concrete answers. And I guess in that way, it makes sense. That is a big part of philosophy, that you're not going to get solid truths. That's not the point of philosophy. But still, at the same time, when you're beginning, it's a little frustrating as a starting point, because you go into philosophy not knowing that you're not going to know. You want to go in and have a few little things that are locked in, or have a few questions answered to get you started, to entice you a little bit more. So I think the Greeks are a better starting point than the Chinese when it comes to philosophy. But my bread and butter came during my junior and senior years, the COVID years, mind you, when I started studying the German pessimists and nihilists. Those are the people that I really loved studying and writing about. I still have all my papers saved, so if I ever wanted to, I could go back to all the papers I wrote and stuff like that. But I guess the best way to explain the Germans and why I love them so much is discussing my thesis very briefly. I know we're going on a total tangent from the title of this video, but bear with me here. Basically, my thesis, it was kind of a story of connecting. I also study the Buddhists and the Hindus as well, but kind of connecting the Germans to the Buddhists and the Hindus and how they kind of connected. Basically, they pin down a certain truth. Again, it's useful to have a little bit of truth. We discussed that already in my zombie video, interestingly enough. But firstly, it's important to have a certain truth locked in. As you go through life, you will find truths, and how you handle them is kind of important. And usually, when you first see a truth, as we see in Plato's Myth of the Cave, we are reluctant to it, we're blind to it, because the sun is too bright. We don't know what we're looking at, and we don't know how to handle this new apparition that we're seeing. So, what the Germans and the Buddhists tell you, in their own unique ways, is that there is nothing. Like the Buddhists are intent on saying that all things are suffering or all things have suffering in them, as my professors have alternatively paraphrased it as being. Meanwhile, the Germans, kind of the seeds of atheism, where they say there is no God, there's no meaning in things. And again, I'm not telling you to believe one way or the other, that's just simply what they were saying. And again, there's no meaning in things, being that there's no significance to any of the objects that we have, to the people we know, at least initially. There's no cosmic force telling us that these things are important or that they hold a meaning, that they spiritually are significant at all. To the Germans, it doesn't mean anything. There is no meaning within these things or these people or these ideas. And when you take those concepts from the Buddhists and the Germans, that's an intimidating thing. You're like, wait, so everything that I've learned, it means nothing. Again, it's kind of tracing back to what Socrates said about saying, I know that I know not. You know nothing. That's kind of what the Germans and the Buddhists are saying. But then the point of my thesis was to say, both the Germans and the Buddhists are endorsing the same truth, but they give you different solutions as to how you cope with it. And both of them are legitimate, in my opinion. Obviously, I prefer the latter over the former, but the former, being the Buddhist, is saying you look to nirvana, you look to the texts, you look towards your faith. And that's what a lot of religions would say. And that's fine. It's a cozy place. It offers you truths. You look at the texts. I didn't have texts as a kid, so that's a great benefit to people who did grow up with religion. But then you look to the Germans, and then they say, yeah, there's no cosmic force that's telling you what to believe in, or that's putting meaning into certain things. But that doesn't mean you don't have the power yourself to put meaning into things on your own time and to choose what's important. And for me, that's what I care about. In life, we're not going to know what's important straight off the bat, usually. We're not going to know whether or not there is a god or some celestial force telling us what to do or what to believe in or what is good or bad or evil, right? But humans are powerful enough to have insurgency over what should be part of our lives, what should guide us. And for me, I think that's the more difficult path, but that's a path worth walking. And that's a segue into the later part of my life, the latest episode in the life of an autistic philosopher, right? I graduated, and before I graduated, there was a really difficult truth that came up. Again, talking about difficult truths, like in my thesis and all that. We learned that the philosophy department was going to be cut. Again, the age old story of like the arts, theater, now philosophy being pulled away from a curriculum because people aren't taking it up as a major, or a school or a college just doesn't find reason to fund those programs. And it was a really horrible sight to see. You saw students start to lose interest over the years. You saw professors being laid off. Really good professors, mind you. They're very well respected, at least by me and by the other staff and by the students. And they were just being kicked out. And I was the second to last year of students that could take philosophy up as a major. And as someone who was so passionate about it and still is, it was a tragedy. Like I liken it to Order 66 from Star Wars, you know? You got the sad John Williams violins and all that, and everyone's getting laid off, and all the students are dropping out, and then you got Yoda putting his hand on his heart. What the hell's going on? He'd never say that, but you get what I mean. But ultimately, like, I wanted to fight to prove with my last breath that this meant something. So it was interesting. I signed on as a tutor. I was an actual tutor at the college. But the students who came to me, it wasn't because they knew I was a tutor. They knew that I could teach them things. Rather, they just heard me talk and they came to me based on that. They didn't see me as a teacher. They saw me as just another student who seemed to know their shit, right? Again, people always saying that I was well spoken throughout my life. And I taught them. I didn't ask for a dime. I just wanted to teach them why philosophy is so important with the little time that we all had left. And that was the greatest time of my life. Like those 2, 3 months about there at the very end of my senior year, teaching students to love philosophy. Students who didn't even major or minor in the subject. Like there was one student who was in nursing, there was another who was a business major, then you had one psychology major, and all of them were struggling a little bit. And at the very least, just wanted to pass the course. And for me, fine, that's okay. But let's help you love philosophy too. I mean, it's in the name. Philo means love, love knowledge, or wisdom rather. Sophie or Sophia, the name Sophia, meaning wisdom, right? Love wisdom. And anyone from any major can do that. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get people to love knowledge and not just see it as a course that they'd have to succeed at to get by. So that's what I did. I taught 4 or 5 students to varying degrees of attentiveness, depending on how much they needed me. But that felt great. It felt really, really good. That was what I highlight as the glory days of my life. I've never felt better, more happy. It was incredible. I know this is going to be a long video, but you need all these pieces to understand the title of this video and what's going on here. So then I graduated. Then I got a fancy plaque saying that I was an honor student within philosophy and religion, which is the greatest achievement that I've ever received. So I knew that I accomplished something special, and not only that, but it was recognized. I did something that made a difference, and that was cool. I've never done that before. So right out of college, I'm like, okay, you know what I want to do? I want to be a professor. I want to teach for the rest of my life. I know there's going to be challenges. I know it's not going to be easy. There's going to be a lot of paperwork. There's going to be competition. I don't care. I want to teach. That's not what happened, though. Instead, I found a job which I still have today, and I won't go into a whole lot of details on the job itself, but to this day, I say it is one of the most important things that's ever happened to me. It's a very good job, a lot of really good people. It allows me to have my own apartment, which is a really huge deal, especially these days in this economy, and it's great. And that's as much as I'll speak to that. But when I first started my job, I remember as soon as I first walked into the office, something in me just sank. It like I tanked. Something in me just disappeared. And I didn't know what it was. It was really weird. So I actually went back to my high school therapist, who I haven't spoken to at all during college because I was doing so well. And he said, "You know what, Max? I think you're depressed. Like, I think you're clinically down in the dumps right now." And that's what it was. I went from my highest high to my absolute lowest low so quick in the span of months that it caused my first clinical depression. And that really sucked. So in my desperation to get myself out of that funk, I'm like, well, I think the only thing that's going to make me happy is philosophy. I have to climb my way back out and get back to it. But I realized sort of what I was anticipating before. It was kind of dark foreshadowing. It's too competitive of an environment. And on top of that, it's a shrinking environment. You're seeing the program being cut from more campuses, right? And even if you did make it into the program, it's very cutthroat, it's very expensive, and at this point in my life, I didn't have the money, I couldn't go back to college if I wanted to. So the door was shut. There was no going back. And again, that kind of goes back to my thesis of the Germans and the Buddhists, sort of saying that there is nothing, there is suffering, there's no meaning in the things that you've invested in. Things are going to disappear, things are going to be destroyed. And that's what happened. I now found myself in a full time job doing the 9 to 5, which again is a good thing. I didn't realize it at the time though. I found myself in a very accusory state. I wanted to blame circumstances. I wanted to blame COVID. I wanted to blame the college. I was mad. I was really not in a good headspace. Again, I mentioned like, oh, 3 years ago I wouldn't be doing this YouTube channel. That's why I wasn't in a good headspace. And I was just really not happy with the fact that the life that I have been working my ass off to obtain, I couldn't have that because you can't get into a philosophy career anymore because it's so undervalued now. And now I had this other job, which was alien territory to me at the time. Of course, now I've come to love and respect it, but back then I'm like, this isn't what I expected to be doing. And even though I'm good at it and everything like that, this wasn't my calling. So, anyways, jumping ahead a little bit, 6 months passed. That's pretty much how long it took me to get out of the depression. Like, granted, there were still struggles, but that's pretty much the time it took for me to get out of the real funk and be able to slowly start crawling forward a little bit. And eventually I did get out of my depression. And then I found the strength to tell my parents, you know what, hey, I want to get my own apartment. I want to live on my own. And I've been doing that for the past 2+ years. And in fact, that's kind of the silver lining here. It kind of came full circle. There's a local library in the town that I live in. And I decided, all right, I'm figured out my rent. I know what I want from life. I want to keep teaching. What can I do at this library? Because there's like groups, there's clubs and stuff like that. And I started my own writing group. And for a long time, like first of all, the group got set up and everything, which is great. But for the longest time, there was a lull. Like I'd walk in, there'd be nobody there. And I'm like, all right, I tried, big whoop. I'm gonna keep coming in. I'm not gonna give up hope on this. And eventually, people started showing up. People wanted to write. People wanted to learn about writing. They want to be surrounded by other people who like writing. I mean, philosophy aside, like philosophy is a part of it, but for me, philosophy is the thing that informs my writing, whether it be creative or just flat out philosophy on its own. But then you get to writing, it's a tool shared by people, whether they be in philosophy or they be doing screenwriting or maybe their spouse is forcing them to write, which is true for one person who was there. But the fact that we were all able to share this tool together, no matter what, where we were coming from, that's where the beauty really kicked in. And that's what was bringing back the high point of college for me. Like just a little bit. And the group still exists. Like it's been on pause this December because of the holidays and all that, but it's going to resume in January. But the fact that the group exists and I built the damn group, like that's a way for philosophy to continue. Again, the group's not about philosophy, but that's what informs my teaching. That's what informs the way I speak. That's what informs my writing. And there's a way for me to have that again. And it's even better than being a professor. When you're a professor, you got to deal with all these contracts, you got to deal with all these curriculums, you got to deal with all this decorum and etiquette. And I'm not about that. I'm not a very, like, tight-laced person. I'm more informal, right? But in a club at the library that I'm running, I can make it whatever I want, and I can mold it based on what people need from the group, what they want to learn from the group. And that's a great thing. So yeah, that's the full story. Like I wanted to dip into philosophy ever since middle school, high school. And high school, I actually started to dabble in it myself, started to write my own philosophy, even though, again, I don't endorse what I wrote at the time because I was a really angsty teen, so it wouldn't serve much value now. And then in college, I was there. I was studying philosophy, studying the big names like Nietzsche, Confucius, whoever. then writing my own papers, tutoring people. Then I hit that really hard depression after graduation when I started my job. Not because of the job, I want to iterate that. Nothing wrong with the job at all. The job is amazing, it's great. One of the best things that's ever happened to me. But it was that sudden shift from being that mentor, having that mentor role, to being that novice again. It's almost like hitting the hard reset button. But again, it's what the Germans and Buddhists are describing as everything being so temporary, everything um, being likely to suddenly self destruct at any given moment, and you're not in control of that. But the thing that they both offer in their own unique way is that there are solutions. You can build yourself out of that. And I'm not saying that I've done that yet. I'm saying that I'm on my way. I'm crawling my way out of there. And you know what? No, I retract that. I wouldn't even say crawling. I'd say I'm up on my feet at this point. I'm marching forward. I know what it is I want to do. And I don't have such heavy expectations for what I want my life to be, because you don't know what your life is going to be. There are going to be moments in your life that you think are the height of your life. There are going to be moments in your life that you think are the absolute worst, and you just want to give up right there. I've had those moments. You've had those moments. You and I, we're going to have more of those moments, for better or for worse. But there are solutions. There's ways out. There's a way to not necessarily solve a situation, but to accept it. I'm never going to be a philosophy professor. I'm pretty damn certain of that. But I could still teach. I could still write. I could still be in love with philosophy, be in love with the love of wisdom, and not be a professor or a tutor or anything like that. And that's okay. There are other ways to harness your love and your passions without it being necessarily within the confines of college or where you first discovered it. You can always find it elsewhere. And if you can't find it, build it. I built it. I went to the library. I said, hey, you know what? I noticed you don't have like a writing group. And I'd like to put it in a certain format so it's welcoming to everyone and anyone can get on board. Sorry if you're hearing some noise. That's my mom's rabbits in the background. But there's always a way. And that's coming from one of the most pessimistic people that you've ever talked to, being me. There's always a way to figure out how to get out of Plato's cave, how to deal with certain truths being uncovered, where you wake up and there's a zombie apocalypse like I talked about in that zombies video. You can figure it out. And you can have help. There are people who are out there to help you. I'm there to help you. You can do it. You can find your way out. You can find alternate solutions. You can get creative. Like, that's why I get so pissed off when people are always, again, like I was doing, like, accusing everyone for my own misfortunes, for my own bad luck. Instead of doing that, try and, like, asking people to, like, change the world for you. Change the world yourself. You have the power to do that. Get creative, get inventive, craft your own tools, and start using those tools. And I could keep going on, but I'll leave it at that. I think I did a good job resolving the main talking point that I want to bring to the forefront here, but some other little points came up that I kind of had to skim over. If you want me to discuss those further, let me know. But yeah, I just want to talk about that. I'm not going to be a philosophy professor ever, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the story. And same goes for you. If you had certain expectations for yourself, and you're not going to be able to realize those expectations, it doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean you screwed up. It doesn't mean the world's out to get you. It just means it's time to try something new. It doesn't have to be totally different from what you were doing before. It just needs to have a little bit more of your personal touch in there. And that might make it more special when you really think about it. You're going to have more insurgency. You're going to be passionate enough to make something fresh. And you're going to, believe it or not, create a life better than what you had before. Better than what you expected. And that's the beauty of it. So rock with that. Do good with that. You're going to be okay. I became okay. You could be okay too. We're not all going to be professors, but we'll be something better. I don't know what that thing is. You don't know either. But hell with it. Let's go on that journey together, right?